This FedGov Today program is sponsored by IBM. On this edition of FedGov Today with Francis Rose, an acquisition revamp at the Pentagon, an AI jumpstart for your agency's reopening efforts, and the tech turbocharge that's coming after the shutdown. Welcome to FedGov Today with Francis Rose. Several acquisition units at the Pentagon are getting new names and new missions. The new acquisition transformation strategy says the department will, quote, prioritize three overarching outcomes for a transformed acquisition system. Nick Guertin's former Assistant Secretary for Research, Development, and Acquisition for the Navy. He's founder of Guertin Transformation Associates. Nick, welcome. It's great to have you on the program. Secretary Hegseth rolled this out Friday before last. A lot of changes here potentially, and you wrote recently on LinkedIn, this is full of initiatives that could have substantial positive impact on defense acquisition outcomes. What did you see here that you like for getting better outcomes in the department?
Well, Francis, first of all, thanks very much for having me on the show. I saw a lot of things that I strongly thought was positive, and when I read them all in this very thick number of activities and transformation efforts, I saw some of my favorite things in there, actually. I've always been a big fan of modular open systems and competition and understanding business models and intellectual property strategies. It was just some tremendous positive movement in there. There's a lot of things in there that I think will be hard to pull off in a relatively short period of time. But I applaud the effort of leading boldly and trying to take charge of something that has really needed this kind of fresh breath to move the department forward in what I think will end up being a very positive way.
There are two things that, as Secretary Hegseth laid them out in his speech, I thought of you. One of them was modular open systems, because you and I have talked about that for at least 15 years. And the second one was moving from a list of requirements to problem statements. That's something that you advocated when you were in the Navy just this last time. What will it take, in your view, to move from where the services are now in the Pentagon as a whole to that concept of problem statements that industry people can then respond to in whatever way they see fit?
I'm enthusiastic about that as a leverage for transformation. When I was the Director for Operational Test and Evaluation, one of the things I put in place was a strategy centered around the idea that software-reliant systems are going to change over time. They have to. But at the time, that organization wasn't centered around this idea of incremental improvement as a part of a life cycle strategy. So one of the things we can get out of having a different way of looking at requirements through that lens will be what does good enough to start look like, and how do we get to like an 80% solution, or what the software folks call a minimum viable product, and then iterate from there. Now, one of the cautions I will say is that there's kind of two ways of looking at the world with some Venn diagram in between, that some of the things that will just require a lot of heavy metal, like, ships and airplanes and submarines, it takes a while to build those things. It takes a while to get the requirements for them right, to the point where you're building a safe vessel that's got the right stealth or flight characteristics or whatever it is. Those are not things that you just decide and then iterate on later. But all the mission systems, all these complex software things that go into those platforms, those weapons of war, those can be under more of a constant change rubric. And if you understand what the general warfighting capability problem set is, you can figure out what are the highest priority things to trade off and interact regularly with the user and be more agile, little a agile, in how we field that capability.
One of the renaming and reframing elements that I talked about in the introduction to this segment is a move from program executive offices to a portfolio management approach. You write on LinkedIn that you like that idea too. What's the difference in that shift? Why do you like it? And what is the better result that the warfighter will get as a result of that?
With a caution that it remains to be seen, because we've gone from an objective to now implementation. Michael Duffy, Undersecretary for Acquisition and Sustainment, he's got to work with the services to figure out exactly how that plays out. But at the core of it is the idea that the portfolio acquisition executive will have an ability to do trades across the programs under his charge. And that will require a lot of interaction with Congress, by the way. They'll have a say in how the money gets spent. But the idea of breaking out of the idea of a program of record as a kind of a whole entity funded all to itself, but that it could be traded off with other things that will do similar work or that have a more profound impact, and have that trade space decision making down to a lower level means that we'll potentially get much more impactful products in a shorter period of time.
What's the potential for any of these initiatives, either the ones that we've talked about or ones that we haven't, because there's a lot here, as you said. What's the potential for some of these to go sideways, and what would prevent, what action should leaders take to make sure that those things don't go sideways, Nick?
So having been in the business of transforming organizations and implementing those kinds of strategies, working with the people who will actually do the work, valuing their input, considering their professional wisdom, and bringing that into play as they move forward with a lot of this, big muscle movement, will be critically important to success. They need to bring the team along as they become a part of living their lives in a different way.
Secretary Hegseth laid out some pretty aggressive timelines for the first steps of this transformation. Does that mean that there will also be a pretty aggressive timeline for people to be able to see if these moves are having the intended effect, or is that a longer tail, do you think?
Well, I think some things will take less time to put in place, and others will require a more thoughtful strategy. I think Michael Duffy had some press recently where he talked about it's really about cost. No, sorry, I'm getting that right. I started talking about the old way, cost, schedule, performance. He's trying to reorder that to schedule performance cost, I think.
You wrote schedule modular on LinkedIn.
Well, that was what I had a friend that said, well, they're taking the iron triangle and they're collapsing it. Well, what would they collapse it to? Schedule and how do we position ourselves to improve over time? That kind of thing takes malice aforethought. You have to think about how to architect a system, how to architect even the craft to be able to take swap outs of functionality as a part of a life cycle choice. That means some of that upfront decision making will take a little bit longer than some people might want if they want immediate results. They might have to be a little patient, especially for brand new systems, to think that through up front before fully committing to an implementation, knowing that you're going to be much more fluid and flexible as a part of that longer life cycle.
Final thought, what will the workforce need? What skills, what capacity and so on that it doesn't have now, or maybe doesn't have enough of now, Nick?
Right, so I think that as we lean forward into digital engineering, using different kinds of tools, different kinds of modeling, I'm a particular big fan of things like digital twins, and even in physical things, the government people will need to understand how they're buying these things. They'll need different tools for that. They'll need to interact more thoughtfully with industry. They'll need to interact more deeply with the users, with the operators, and that three-party conversation around how do we improve over time will need a different kinds of interaction mechanism and more robust tooling in order to support those outcomes.
How will you know a year from now or 2 years from 5 years from now that this turned out the way that the Secretary and his team intended it?
Wow, that's a great question. I haven't thought that one through. I would say that sometimes you can measure the success of a transformation effort on joy. How happy are people with the work that they're doing? How committed are they? Well, everybody in this acquisition system is committed, but are they having any fun doing it? Do they feel personally connected in the work? And I think that will be, maybe that's not a great specific metric, something you can put on a wall chart, but that's what I'll be looking for.
Nick, it's great to have you back on the program. Thanks for joining me today.
My pleasure. Thank you again.
You can read more about the Pentagon's acquisition reform effort on today's show page at fedgovtoday.com.